I will start in Russian. Into English. Добрый день, дорогие участники.
Good afternoon, dear forum participants. We are incredibly lucky to have Richard here with us because for many years he was being invited to Moscow. We were able to bring him over to the city of Kazan 2 years ago, and there was a pilgrimage of the Moscow Urbanists who came over to the capital of the Republic of Tatarstan to listen to Richard and to be able to talk to him. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers of the Moscow Urban Forum for translating and publishing the latest book by the Richard, New Urban Crisis, in the Russian language, because as we'll be discussing throughout our session, there are many good recipes and opinions valid for Russian cities and laid out in this book, and I guess Richard will share with us about this a bit later. As we've agreed with the organizers, the interview will be in English. I would like to apologize beforehand. And unless you speak English, you may use the translation headset. In another household announcement, you may download an app of the Moscow Urban Forum. You open the app and there is an insert programs. You can find our session, interview, development of creative cities by Richard Florida, and to ask your question to a moderator. This question will end up in my app, and if it will be a part of our conversation, I will ask it. And with this, I will engage in the interview.
Have you here? And I wanted to, first of all, give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, because everyone has heard your name, but not everyone knows what a beautiful person you are. So please tell me how you entered this great world of urbanism, and who were your teachers, and what is your relationship to Jane Jacobs?
Hi, I'm Rich. No, it's really an honor to be here, and to walk around and see what's been accomplished in this city since the last time I was here just a few years ago was really remarkable. So congratulations, and thank you to the sponsors and organizers of this incredible forum. You know, I'm seeing my friends from around the world here, which shows that Moscow and Russia have become a hub in this conversation. Well, how did I get interested in urbanism? When I was a young boy, barely 10 years old, the city I was born in, Newark, not New York City, but Newark, right across the river from New York City, burst into flames. The city went into riots. And I think as a young boy, if you see your city engulfed in flame, with its business district in smoke, with tanks occupying the street, it leaves an impression. Now, I didn't know that until I was in university, but in university, actually, I'm the first in my family to go to college. They wanted me to be a doctor, a medical doctor, and I had no interest. So I found urbanism. Actually, a professor said to go to New York City and make a diary of what I saw, and I was hooked. So then I started to work on cities before there was anything like a Moscow Urban Forum. Before this field was hot or sexy, it was boring, and no one went into urbanism in the 1980s and 90s. But I was lucky. The field that I found because of my passion became an important field. There are forums like this all over the world. And I was also lucky that in the early 2000s, when I was writing my book on the creative class, I was invited to Toronto, where I now live part of the year, and I did get to meet Jane Jacobs, and we became very, very, very close friends. And she left an indelible mark on me. So then the rest of my time has just been spent trying to learn more. This is not rocket science, you know. It's really using your eyes and ears to learn about cities and how they have come back and how they're being built. And I'm lucky, you know, Natalia, because I get to travel to cities all over the world and see this, and maybe through my writing try to synthesize it and bring it to other people.
Okay, and now how did you use your ears and eyes to come to the creative class theory? Tell us the story.
So, you know, you're in Kazan now.
Yeah.
So I was in Pittsburgh. An industrial city, a famous city, a city of steel, of heavy industry, and I was teaching at a spectacular university called Carnegie Mellon University. This university, although it's much smaller than MIT, was inventing many of the technologies of robots, self-driving cars, the internet, social media, that really revolutionized the world. But instead of them taking root in Pittsburgh, people were moving. My faculty colleagues, my students were moving to the San Francisco Bay Area, to the Silicon Valley, to Boston, to New York. And everything was leaving. So that's when I got the idea that it wasn't just having a great business climate and a great industrial structure, that it really was about people and attracting people. And the conclusion I left is that where people locate will also where business locates, but where people locates will drive innovation and economic growth. So I came up with this idea that if we're an artist, if we're a designer, if we're a musician, if we're a techie, a software developer, a CEO, a civic leader, and we proved this empirically. You know, once I got to meet Bono, it's kind of interesting, and Bono said to me, yeah, you're the guy who saw that there was a creative class empirically. That's exactly what he used, like we have in Dublin, because he's from Dublin. So he saw this. So I was able to document that using statistical data, first for the United States, but then Russia and the rest of the world. So this is about a third of the workforce in the advanced countries, but in certain cities, it's as much as 40 or 50 or 60% of the workforce. So really, the way the blue-collar working class, the proletariat, was the driving force of its time, this new creative class of knowledge works, of artists, of intellects, of designers is the driving class of our time. Where they locate, where they choose to be, will have a big effect on what the cities that are innovative and that grow and are economically competitive.
Right, but well, some would claim that this division between the working class, the proletarian class, and the creative class, the gap between them, the extent to which it is great, led us to Brexit, to Donald Trump election. What would you say about that? What do you think about the translation of this urban gap into the political conflict?
A little hidden secret is, you know, I've studied Marx, I've studied Marxist history, I've studied Russian history in school. In fact, I was a political theory minor, and political theory and the history of Marxism very much interested me. So if you think about it, the working class was the driving class of its time. 50% of more of the population were workers, and it was a very forward-looking class. It was a class that was forging a new society, throwing off the shackles of the old feudal order. I argue that we are going through an even bigger economic transformation today. For all of human history before us, we created wealth, whether we were an agrarian society, a feudal society, or an industrial society, by using human physical labor to transform nature. This is the first time in world history that now the mind has become the means of production. Right? Marx even anticipated this in the Grundrisse. If you read it, you know, nature builds no locomotives, no self-acting mules. These are products of the human brain, objectified, socialized knowledge. It's very interesting that 150 years ago he could anticipate this. But this gives rise to a new class structure. And the progressive class, if you will, and the class on the front end of history is this knowledge class, this creative class. But you are right. And this is where my most recent work that we've documented, it has created a new class divide between the very advantaged third, or in the most advanced countries of Northern Europe, like Netherlands, like Denmark, like Sweden, or Singapore or Hong Kong. Maybe there's 40 or 45% or 50% creative class, but still 50% being left behind. It's not just a class divide. That's important. It's a geographic divide. It's not just economic inequality, it's spatial and geographic inequality. In a sense, the creative class colonizes the big progressive cities, and the other classes are shunted off into the cities left behind, and that you get a backlash. You know, it's not only Brexit and Trump. I saw it in Toronto. Remember, if you're not familiar with Toronto, a great progressive city, 50% foreign-born, a city of social tolerance, they elected Rob Ford. If you remember from the news, he was the mayor who did crack, the original populist. So you see this happening all across the world, and I believe it's a reaction to this class and geographic division that comes from this amazing, really epical economic and class transformation.
All right, so do we carry on like that? Do we carry on promoting this rise of the creative class, if we can control it at all? How do we shape the urban policies, keeping in mind the outcomes for the political part of our life, of our nation's life?
So first of all, I think the trajectory and logic of history suggests that we will end up in a better place. We're not going to go through the extreme labor conflicts or civil conflicts or world wars of previous eras. For all of the issues we see on the global scene, Some of them big, some of them trivial. We are not in the situation of my parents and some of your grandparents. We are managing this reasonably well. Look, we have to build a new kind of society. You're trying to do so here. We're not trying to do so well in the United States. In Canada, doing better. I call it inclusive growth and prosperity, inclusive creativity. We can no longer believe that just if an advantage 1%, or an advantage 33%, or an advantage 40% are doing fine, all will be well. The advantaged groups, and especially the advantaged creative class, owe society and owe history to be inclusive. Now, what's happened, though, in my country, and being very candid.
Which one is your country?
Let's say the United States, the country of my birth, not my adopted country of Canada.
Okay.
We are having an experiment in how to run a country without a federal government. So we are eliminating a social safety net. What that is doing, of course, is creating a tremendous backlash of people putting pressure on local government, even on corporations, tech corporations, real estate developers, to help them live in a more inclusive society. I think if you have a federal government and a national government that believes in urbanism, which is the case in Canada, where we're trying to develop a new national urban project, you can begin to think about ways to bring up declining regions, to invest in transit and transport, high-speed rail, to engage people. One of the big things I think we have to transform, Natalia, there are really three big classes in today's society. We've mentioned two. The creative class, the knowledge class, and the old blue-collar working class of my father. The biggest class in today's society is the service class. In Russia, in the United States, and Canada, that's 45 or 50% of the workforce. These are people who work in restaurants, hotels, daycare centers, take care of our aging parents and our children, provide personal health care, massage, all of this. The gap between them and the creative class is astronomical. These are the people who can't afford to live in the city. So one of the things we need to think about is, as we upgraded blue-collar jobs and made them better jobs and paid the blue-collar worker like my dad a higher wage, we have to do the same for the largely female service class. And I think this agenda, as well as dealing with spatial inequality, this agenda of upgrading service class jobs, of making those jobs good-paying jobs through various mechanisms, is really a key agenda of the future.
Very well. Now, I would really love you to turn back to what you started mentioning about federal approach to urban development. Should cities try to get as independent as possible, or is it good when there is a federal agenda? What would you recommend?
Boy, this is, I think, the question of the future. And let me put it in a kind of conceptual way. We look at the world through the lens, in many times, of a very strong federal government, somewhat strong provincial or state government, right? Yeah. Tatarstan, Ontario, New York, California, and a weak city. I actually think what has happened, if you listen to all of this conversation that's happening in this forum, the economic logic of today's economy, the driver of economic growth is not just the location of the creative class and knowledge work, it's the compacting of these people in cities. So the world isn't flat, it's spiky, and it's becoming spikier. So the concentration of creative people in cities is the driver of economic growth and innovation. In fact, this was Jane Jacobs' great contribution. She figured this out, that what the real force of economic growth isn't large corporations or deposits of raw materials. It's the compacting and clustering of creative and ambitious and talented